Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Queens, New York. Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, just after 5 p.m. Karina Vetrano, 30, leaves her Howard Beach home for a routine run into Spring Creek Park. It's daylight, the path is familiar, and her route is short. Within minutes, messages to her phone go unanswered, unusual for a runner who normally checks in. By nightfall, the reads off 161st Avenue are no longer just marsh, they're a controlled crime scene. The early timeline is built from things that can be clocked. Departure a little after 5. Missed responses as the evening wears on. A worried check-in escalates to a ground search. Patrol units from the 106th Precinct converge near the park's south access. Radios start time-stamping assignments. Outer perimeter first, inner perimeter next, then a slow, methodical sweep off the main trail. The goal is simple. Locate the runner, preserve whatever explains why she didn't return. And quiet anomalies show up fast. There's no witness who saw an attack inside the brush, no 911 from the victim's phone during the window when she should have been reachable. The path is public, but the assault pocket is screened by cattails and scrub, the kind of cover that defeats distant cameras and casual passers-by. For first responders, that means fewer anchors and more need for discipline. Set the line, stop the trample, and write everything down. Around 10:45 p.m., the search locks onto a disturbed patch of vegetation just off the footpath. Officers freeze the area and pull back the civilians who helped look. From that point forward, the park is no longer a place to look for someone alive. It's a place to collect evidence without corrupting it. Command posts don't mourn, they manage. A crime scene log starts, entry by entry. Names, shield numbers, time in, time out. No one touches anything unless it's assigned and photographed. The Office of Chief Medical Examiner is notified. The first night is about control, not conclusions. If you've ever wondered why detectives seem cold, this is why. Emotion and urgency can crush fragile trace. Gloves go on, lights angle away from direct glare. A phone is spotted near the corridor and marked for later processing, but not yet narrated, not yet explained. The discipline is boring to watch and essential to justice. In boroughs like Queens, crimes in public parks don't just make headlines. They change how communities move. They also punish shortcuts in the record. The data has to do the work. Here's the human-scale reality that sits next to the paperwork. Routine is what lulls people's guard, and routine is what sharpens investigators' eyes. When a runner who always checks in doesn't, that negative signal matters. When an open space assault leaves few obvious anchors, no witness, no immediate camera angle, that absence is as useful as a footprint. It sets the boundaries for what will and won't be possible in court. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Tonight, it simply means the case will live or die on timing, trace, and careful custody. The first response closes with a handoff. The scene is stable. The search is over. Now the body is evidence, bagged, sealed, and escorted under chain of custody to the medical examiner. From here on, every claim needs a tag, preliminary, working, or confirmed. That's how you build a homicide case that survives not only a jury, but years of scrutiny. Custody replaces speculation. From this point forward, every claim needs a tag, preliminary, working, or confirmed. At the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in Manhattan, the handoff is by the book. The transport team arrives with tamper seals intact and a paper trail that already lists the park coordinates, the time the perimeter was locked, and the names and shield numbers of those who last had physical custody. Receiving techs log the case number, apply a barcoded wrist tag, and photograph seals before breaking them. This is not a second discovery, it is evidence intake. Identification is handled in parallel with preservation. A property envelope is inventoried. Jewelry, hair ties, and personal effects that came in with the body are photographed and sealed in separate bags. Clothing is air-dried if needed and packaged in breathable paper, never plastic, to prevent degradation of biological material. Fingernails are photographed close-up, then scrapings are collected into bindles, each labeled with date, time, initials, and kit lot numbers. Swabs of the neck, hands, and other relevant areas are taken according to sexual assault kit protocol. Every envelope receives a unique evidence identifier and a chain of custody line that will later reappear in court. Photography documents what words can blur. Full body orientation images come first, then regional shots, then scales and frame injury mapping. Nothing is embellished, lighting is flat, angles repeatable. The intake physician notes patterned abrasions and neck findings consistent, at this stage only consistent, with manual compression. That word matters. It avoids a conclusion before the autopsy confirms mechanism. The external exam is followed by a methodical internal exam. The pathologist maintains a tight lexicon: petechiae, soft tissue hemorrhage, hyoid and thyroid cartilage assessment. The record still captures what the court needs: preliminary neck trauma supporting strangulation, later confirmed in the final report. Blood and vitreous samples are drawn for toxicology. Swabs are sealed for DNA. Any foreign hair or fiber is lifted with tape tabs and placed into separate packets. The phone recovered at the scene is not opened here. That remains an NYPD and lab function, but swabs from the victim's hands and neck are prepared for comparison against profiles that may be developed later. Chain of custody signatures never stop. Each kit envelope is initialed across the seal. A custody form shows who had the envelope, for how long, and why. If you've ever wondered how a homicide file survives years of appeals, this is the answer. It survives because every inch of tape has initials and timestamps. In boroughs like Queens, murders aren't just crimes, they test how carefully public systems work under pressure. The pathologist finalizes the preliminary cause and manner notations only after correlating the physical findings with scene notes supplied by detectives. Notes that describe a brush-choked corridor with limited camera coverage and no verified eyewitness. That scene context is not evidence of guilt. It's the environment that explains why the case will lean heavily on biology, chronology, and later, digital records. The medical report will avoid narrative verbs and stick to anatomy and timing. It will also clock when samples were taken and where they went next, so the lab can prove continuity from the autopsy suite to the evidence freezer and onward to DNA extraction. Before release back to the family, trace and clothing are already en route to the lab. The OCME retains slides, photographs, and the master evidence log. Nothing here predicts who did this. It only defines what happened and preserves the how in a way that can be tested independently. The discipline is deliberate. The absence of a weapon is recorded as working. No external instrument recovered to date. The presence of biological material is recorded as confirmed. Samples are in sealed envelopes, ready for comparison. The final step of the day is administrative but decisive. Sign-offs, evidence transfer receipts, and a notification to the case detective squad that preliminary findings support strangulation. That message does not include a theory. It includes a clock and a mechanism. The rest will come from labs, logs, and interviews. Those sealed packets now drive the investigation back to the trail, where a thin scene will have to be rebuilt by trace, video, and timing rather than eyewitnesses. Crime Scene Unit works the Marsh Corridor with a clear objective: document, collect, and preserve anything that will survive a courtroom. The perimeter set the night before hold. Entry and exit are controlled through a single taped lane. Everyone signs the scene log. Stepping plates go down to protect fragile ground. A base map is sketched, then refined with total station shots, so later testimony can place each item by distance and bearing rather than guesswork. The search pattern is linear along the footpath, then radial into the reeds where disturbance was first recorded. This is not a second discovery, it is a methodical pass for trace. Technicians flag crushed vegetation that forms a shallow arc off the path. That line is photographed with scales and north arrows and then measured. It reads like a movement corridor, not a campsite. Short, directional, consistent with a sudden off-trail encounter. The observation is logged as working, not a conclusion. The handset marked during the initial lockdown is now fully documented. Wide shot, medium, and close with scale, then a GPS coordinate pull for the scene diagram. It is packaged in a Faraday sleeve and sealed. Status: confirmed recovery. No on-site powering or scrolling. Digital handling follows lab protocols to prevent alteration. The location becomes a fixed point for later animations. A coordinate jurors can see instead of imagine. Footwear impressions are visible in patches of damp substrate but lack clear class or wear features. Plaster casting is attempted on the two best outlines. Their evidentiary value is logged as working pending lab comparison. Given summer heat and water intrusion from the marsh, CSU notes from the start that impressions may collapse. That limitation is recorded to preempt overpromising. Vegetation yields micro-trace. Reed fronds with apparent transfer are cut above the disturbance line, placed on clean paper, and sealed. Soil is collected in triplicate, 2 for testing, 1 held back for defense examination if ordered. These samples are working until a lab sees plant fragments, pollen, or mineral profiles that can connect scene to clothing. The team also lifts potential fiber with tape tabs from surfaces adjacent to the disturbance. Outdoor work rarely returns high-value touch DNA, but failures are documented as faithfully as hits. Negative results can matter when defense asks whether the scene was overinterpreted. Latent print work is limited by heat and rough surfaces. Smooth plastics or glass are rare along the corridor. CSU still checks nearby signage, the phone's exterior packaging area, and any found debris for ridge detail. As expected, no usable latent prints is recorded for the outdoor site. That's not a flaw. It's the reality of an exposed environment. The report language stays neutral and technical. Parallel to ground collection, detectives run a camera canvas. This is where a thin scene can gain context. In 2016, interior park coverage is sparse. The strategy focuses on the edges. Residences facing 161st Avenue and 78th Street, storefronts on approach roads, and any traffic or municipal cameras near the Belt Parkway corridor. Owners are contacted, consent forms signed, and DVR pulls scheduled before systems overwrite. Clips are cloned. The originals remain with the owner unless seized by warrant. Each clip gets a unique label, frame rate, and time offset note so the timeline can be normalized later. Early viewings show pedestrians and vehicles near the park entrance within relevant windows, but nothing capturing the assault pocket itself. Status: working. These angle lists will become leads, not proof. Vehicle processing at this stage is about possibilities, not suspects. Any car repeatedly entering and exiting the same access point during the window is noted, and if plates are legible, logged for DMV queries and owner interviews. That list is working only. No vehicle is tied to the victim. None is declared a getaway. The point is to create a roster before time erases it. Back at the scene, clothing positions and orientation are diagrammed from photographs taken before removal. Orientation arrows are recorded so the lab can test hypotheses about grab points and stress areas without reconstructing from memory. If a branch shows bending or breakage consistent with rapid movement, it's cut and bagged with a label describing height from ground and relation to the path. The OCME's preliminary note pointing to manual compression informs where CSU looks for secondary contact. Reeds clustered at shoulder height, the place of struggle would likely leave skin or fabric trace. That search is working until the lab says otherwise. Throughout, the narrative voice in the log is restrained. Observed, collected, sealed, transferred. No speculation about motive, no informal theories. The cleanest cases are built when the ground story reads the same in every report. In neighborhoods like Howard Beach, crimes in public parks unsettle routines. The response here shows a different kind of routine, the kind that keeps verdicts from turning on doubt about the process. Clean lines in the paperwork do not mean the path was simple. They mean the path is verifiable. By afternoon, the corridor is cleared in reverse order. Last in, first out, photographing each removal. The map is updated, the evidence count reconciled, and the scene log closed. Everything moves under seal to the property clerk and lab. What remains is the absence that opened this investigation. No eyewitness inside the reeds, no fixed camera aimed at the assault pocket. Those constraints are recorded once and left to do their proper work, defining the next avenues, not feeding speculation. The file leaves the marsh carrying coordinates, samples, and hours of edge video, enough to move the story forward without repeating the first night's alarm. From the morgue and the marsh, the next lead comes from clocks and circuits. Handset, carrier records, and neighborhood DVRs are reviewed in parallel because when a public space crime leaves few direct witnesses, the timeline becomes the witness. The phone recovered near the trail is transferred in a Faraday sleeve to prevent new radio traffic. At the lab, imaging runs in 2 tracks, a physical copy when supported and a logical extraction for faster review. Each image is hashed, the digest recorded, and a read-only workflow is set, so nothing written later can be accused of altering the device. Examiners start with low-risk fields that speak purely to time: last unlock, last successful text, unanswered call attempts, notification timestamps, and battery status around the run window. The output is practical rather than cinematic. It brackets a dark interval that aligns with the evening run. There is no outgoing 911 within that window. Message attempts from contacts don't register a reply. Those are not theories, they are clock points. Carrier-side subpoenas produce call detail records and cell site or sector metadata for the same hours. Engineers overlay serving sectors for the Howard Beach corridor on a base map of Spring Creek Park. Sector width and range are approximate by design. The phone is not a GPS tag, but the sectors that pick up the device before and after the dark interval are consistent with a handset that stayed near the southern park edge rather than transiting across boroughs. Where records show tower hands between adjacent sites, the pattern is ordinary for a dense urban area. The reading is entered as working because sector coverage can overlap and bounce with load and weather. The value here is not pinpointing a trail, it's bounding the possibilities. The neighborhood camera canvas from the prior chapter now shifts to processing. Investigators normalize times across different DVR systems. And a deli camera is 4 minutes fast, a home system is 7 minutes slow, a traffic feed near the Belt Parkway is stamped in UTC. Each stream gets a correction note, and then the clips are sequenced against the handset and carrier clocks. This prevents a common error, arguing that a person was in two places at once because two clocks disagreed. The sequence produces a clean perimeter view: foot traffic at the park entrance, a handful of vehicles that enter and exit during the window, and a trickle of dog walkers as the light fades. None of the angles capture the brush pocket itself. That absence is logged once and carried forward. It is a constraint, not a twist. Two vehicles are tagged for follow-up because they pass the same curb twice inside a narrow span. That is routine, not accusatory. Plates, when legible, go to DMV queries. Registered owners are contacted later. A few pedestrians of interest are noted for interviews: people who move toward or away from the south axis near the relevant times. They are approached to confirm what they saw or didn't see and to lock an outside time check against the digital record. This tightens the edges of the timeline without pretending that edge video substitutes for an on-scene camera. Back on the handset copy, examiners check for health logs and motion-related counters that some models maintain by default. If present, those entries are recorded cautiously, again as working, because sensor data can be interrupted by impact or power loss, and because not every handset logs those metrics at a usable level. Photos and videos are reviewed for any accidental capture during the run. Nothing in open reporting suggests a live recorded assault, and no such claim is made here. Contacts and routine messaging patterns from prior days help define normal behavior, which is necessary context for arguing what was abnormal on August 2nd. Financial checks are part of standard procedure: bank card taps, ride-hail records, transit cards, because those can either corroborate movement or rule out a detour. Public reporting on this homicide has focused on biology and interviews rather than money trails. That means finances are treated as a due diligence lane, screened, logged, and if nothing material turns up, left out of charging theory. The absence of a transaction in the window is not offered as drama, it simply avoids false avenues. What emerges by the end of this phase is a defensible scaffold: a phone that stops responding within minutes, a corridor of reads with no fixed camera, a perimeter of homes and shops whose clocks can be reconciled to the carrier record. None of that identifies who was in the brush with the victim. It does, however, give prosecutors and defenders the same map and the same clocks, which is how a trial avoids becoming a battle of vibes. In neighborhoods like Howard Beach, public spaces belong to everyone. Accountability relies on design choices, lighting, sightlines, camera coverage, as much as it relies on detective work. When infrastructure is thin, accuracy in paperwork is the next best guardrail. Two practical decisions close this chapter. First, the handset stays sealed after imaging, available for defense inspection under court order. Second, the reconciled video timeline is duplicated, hashed, and stored in evidence with a plain language index so jurors can see what investigators saw in the same order. No narration, no mood music, just the clock. From clocks and cameras, the work shifts to voices. Detectives start with the people who can anchor behavior without guessing: family, friends, nearby residents, and regular runners who know the Spring Creek Park routine. According to contemporaneous reports and police paperwork, those early interviews confirm that Karina Vetrano typically checked in, kept a tight route from 84th Street toward the Marsh corridor, and was responsive unless she was actively moving. That baseline matters. When calls went unanswered within minutes, it wasn't just worry, it was deviation from her normal pattern. Door-to-door canvas logs build outward from the south access near 161st Avenue and 78th Street. Residents are asked for exterior camera access, what they saw, and when they saw it. Joggers and dog walkers who used the path that evening are documented, even if all they can offer is nothing unusual. Negative statements are still evidence. They set what was not observed. Every account is time-stamped and mapped back to the reconciled DVR clocks and the handset's silent interval, so the narrative aligns with the artifacts. As the biology pipeline advances, the interviews branch to potential persons of interest. Leads are triaged, prior field stops in the broader area, tips from the public, and names that surface when canvas notes intersect with time windows. Months later, on February 4, 2017, detectives question a 20-year-old man, Chanel Lewis, after lab results indicate his DNA profile is consistent with material recovered in the case, according to police and court filings. He is transported to a precinct, advised of rights, and a recorded interview begins. The taping is purposeful. Jurors cannot weigh what they cannot see. On video, Lewis describes entering the park alone and encountering a woman he did not know. He admits to an assault that escalated to strangulation. The phrasing is spare, with little embellishment, which prosecutors later describe as reliability, and the defense calls contamination by suggestion. A second recording follows at the scene. He is shown the corridor area. He points out where he says he moved and where the struggle happened. Those demonstrations are logged, their timing cross-referenced against weather, daylight, and the terrain layout. Investigators note consistencies: general placement off the path, movement toward reeds, and gaps. The statement does not produce a weapon and does not create new physical artifacts at the demonstration. The admission is central, but it is not the only thing the file will carry. Comparative analysis runs in two columns: statement content versus lab findings, and statement timing versus the established digital perimeter. The medical examiner's strangulation determination aligns with what Lewis says he did. The handset's dark interval aligns with a narrow evening window. The canvas confirms no eyewitness inside the reeds. Where interview language drifts on exactly how he entered the brush or when he left, the record does not fill in with speculation. It marks ambiguity and moves on. Defense counsel will later argue voluntariness, interrogation length, and suggestibility. Prosecutors will argue a detailed, taped admission that matches injury patterns and the geography of the corridor. Both positions anticipate court. A confession is never the end of an inquiry. It's the beginning of corroboration. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Here, the file is built so the statement stands next to DNA, next to timestamps, not on top of them. One more pass through the neighborhood closes this phase. Detectives re-interview a short list of pedestrians and nearby residents using corrected DVR times so no one's memory is tested against a wrong clock. Nothing new appears that contradicts the recorded admission or the lab work. The absence is documented once and left alone. The next step asks a narrow question: was this planned or seized in the moment? Detectives pull every routine procurement thread: retail receipts, pawn logs, nearby surveillance tied to hardware or restraints, ride-hail and transit purchases, looking for a purchase or reservation that would signal preparation. Nothing material surfaces that links a weapon, a vehicle, or tools to the assault window. That negative is documented, not dramatized. When a crime leaves few objects behind, a clean no can be as probative as a yes. Autopsy findings point to manual strangulation. That alone steers investigators away from a hardware-based plan. With no knife, no ligature recovered, and no trace of synthetic fibers that would read like cordage, the working theory remains opportunistic contact off a public path. Clothing collection and orientation diagrams from the trail are rechecked against micro-trace, vegetation, loose fibers, soil mineral profiles to ensure nothing suggests a pre-staged restraint or transport. Lab notes at this phase keep the tags clear. Confirmed for what the OCME has ruled. Working for trace comparisons still underway. Negative where inventories and video reviews yield nothing tied to purchase or prep. Digital lanes are mined for the same planning signals. Carrier records and handset extraction already bracketed a dark interval during the run. Now analysts scan the days before the assault for activity that would look like staging. Coordinated meetups, ride orders to the corridor, unusual browsing or notes referencing the park. Public reporting emphasizes biology and interviews, not cyber planning, and no sourced record indicates GPS-style tracking or coordinated accomplices. The absence of serialized planning is recorded once and carried forward so the file does not inflate silence into theory. On the suspect side, detectives complete a standard life pattern check for Chanel Lewis after his February 2017 admission and DNA comparison. Bank activity shows no flight indicator, no airline booking, bus ticket, or sudden long-haul travel in the aftermath. He remains in the borough. Medical and pharmacy checks, where lawfully obtained, don't produce a treatment entry that ties to acute injury care traceable to that night. Months have passed. Any superficial marks would be non-probative. The write-up avoids retrofitting. A lack of treatment records doesn't prove the absence of injury. It only denies a paper trail. Pathway analysis bears weight. Perimeter DVRs, already time-corrected, don't show a vehicle consistently tied to arrival, an immediate departure in sync with the assault window. A short list of cars and pedestrians remain working leads, but none elevate to confirmed transport for the offender. The simplest reading survives: ingress on foot, brief contact in the reads, egress on foot. In neighborhoods like Howard Beach, public parks are shared space. Opportunity thrives where cover exists and surveillance doesn't. Prosecutors begin sketching a charge theory that does not depend on a shopping list or a getaway car. It links a narrow evening window, a secluded corridor, the OCME's mechanism, the reconciled clocks, and a recorded admission from a man who did not know the victim. Defense counsel sees the same voids, the lack of weapon, the lack of a purchasable prelude, and will argue that absence should count against certainty. That is why the paperwork stays careful about labels. Confirmed is earned by testing. Working is not proof. Negative is not a story. It's a limit. One decision closes this phase. Investigators memorialize the procurement sweep in a concise, indexable memo: what was searched, how far back, and what was not found, so a jury, and later an appellate court, can see the shape of due diligence. The file moves next to charging instruments, warrants, and interagency roles. With biology, clocks, and a recorded statement aligned, the file moved from investigation to charging. Detectives documented a consensual buccal swab from a 20-year-old man in early February 2017. According to police reports, OCME analysts compared that reference profile to DNA recovered during the homicide inquiry, including material swabbed from the victim's body and personal effects. The reported match gave prosecutors a clean, probable cause spine that did not depend on an eyewitness. Within minutes of the lab notification, arrest paperwork and the first complaint were prepared. Arraignment followed on second-degree murder under New York Penal Law A125.25. As the medical and digital components firmed up, the Queens District Attorney's Office refined the theory to reflect a homicide committed during a sex offense. Additional counts addressing sexual assault were added, moving the posture toward a felony murder-style predicate in which force, sexual contact, and death are part of one continuous act. That shift did not change the scene. It changed the legal lens through which jurors would be asked to view the same minutes inside the reads. Interagency roles stayed orthodox. NYPD detectives, 106th Precinct and Queens South, handled scene control, canvass, interviews, and custodial statements. The Office of Chief Medical Examiner conducted autopsy, collection, DNA extraction, and comparison, each envelope and slide linked by chain of custody numbers that could be recited in court. The Queens DA's trials and special victims units drafted complaints, supervised grand jury presentation, and managed discovery to defense. Lab notes, scene logs, video indices, and interview recordings. Search warrants followed for digital devices associated with the accused. According to court filings summarized in open court, examiners reported locating search terms indicative of sexualized violence in handset content. Prosecutors previewed that material as state-of-mind evidence designed to sit beside the biological identification and the taped admission. Defense counsel flagged the issue for later admissibility challenges. The alignment was intentional: identity through DNA, mechanism through OCME, opportunity through the reconciled timeline, and intent via digital context. The defense narrative developed in parallel. Attorneys raised concerns about the voluntariness and length of interrogation, about whether questioning could have shaped language on tape, and about investigative scope, including reports that detectives conducted wide DNA outreach during the early phase. Prosecutors answered that the swab was voluntary, that the recording showed clear waiver, and that the laboratory pipeline conformed to standard practice. Those positions were logged now because they would decide the next stage, what the jury would hear. Throughout, the paper stays sparse and testable: a sworn lab affidavit that links reference to unknown without jargon, a warrant return that lists the device, hash values, and extraction software, a grand jury presentation that walks jurors chronologically, phone silence within minutes, perimeter video with corrected clocks, body as scene findings, supporting manual strangulation, and a defendant who, on video, described a fatal assault on a stranger. The narrative avoids overpromising. Every claim is tagged preliminary, working, or confirmed. One administrative decision closed this phase. Prosecutors consolidated the procurement sweep, the video time corrections, the OCME chain, and the warrant returns into a single index disclosure packet that ensures defense and later an appellate court can audit methods in the same order detectives used. The file now advances to gatekeeping, suppression motions, Fry challenges, and the limits on what comes in front of a Queen's jury. From charging to courtroom, the narrative shifted from probable cause to proof. Queen's Supreme Court moved quickly after indictment. The first jury was sworn in November 2018, and, after days of deliberation, deadlocked, forcing a mistrial. The second panel, seated in March 2019, heard a tighter presentation. Jurors watched the defendant's recorded statements. They walked through the forensic timeline. They were shown how the DNA profile recovered from high-touch areas on the victim's person and effects aligned with a reference swab taken during the investigation. Prosecutors framed the chain of custody step by step. The defense challenged reliability, laboratory interpretation of DNA mixtures, the scope of the park search, and the interview tactics that produced the statements. The court admitted both the forensic results and the recordings, instructing jurors on how to weigh them against cross-examination. Within weeks, the second jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts on murder and sexual abuse counts. Later that month, April 2019, the trial judge imposed life without parole. In that moment, a procedural crime story became a permanent sentence. The court record by then included the physical tracework, the digital silence windows, the statements, and a geography chain that never left Queens. Pre- and post-verdict litigation followed. Defense counsel moved to set aside the verdict, alleging juror issues and contesting the weight of the evidence. The trial court denied those requests. On appeal, lawyers attacked the admissibility of the defendant's statements, laboratory methods, and pre-trial publicity. Appellate rulings over the next years left the conviction intact. Separate collateral motions argued that a private DNA vendor's role and broad police canvassing created constitutional problems. Prosecutors answered with affidavits, lab documentation, and a unifying point. The jury had already evaluated those same disputes under instruction, and the paper trail supporting the evidence had been produced. By August 2023, a new motion to vacate pressed a racial dragnet theory and licensing challenges to DNA work. The filing did not introduce exonerating biology, no third-party profile that excluded the defendant from the critical items, so the dispute remained legal, not new evidence-driven. Across these proceedings, one feature stayed consistent. The geography chain never changed. Every contested decision, stop, swab, search, interview, was anchored to the same corridors of Howard Beach and the same narrow window of time. Court practice is slow by design, and the record grew. Some arguments focused on mixture statistics and how to explain them to a lay jury. Others focused on the voluntariness of the defendant's statements. Judges compared the transcripts to the video, the lab notes to the exhibits, the orders to the return receipts. The rulings read the same way. Admissibility standards were met. Credibility remained the province of jurors. Meanwhile, the sentence, life without parole, stood. By 2024-2025, defense teams continued to explore federal avenues and state collateral review. The story for viewers here is about weight versus admissibility. Appellate courts rarely retry facts. They test whether the process met constitutional lines. Was the stop lawful? Was the consent to swab valid? Was the confession voluntary? Were the expert opinions properly bounded? When those answers fall on the state side, the verdict remains the community's judgment unless new, material evidence emerges. That brings us to what matters for public safety and fairness. First, the chain of custody discipline in this file, clear logs, itemized transfers, documented analysis, gave the court a stable base. Second, the digital negatives, dark intervals in phone activity consistent with the timeline, were not dramatic, but they were coherent with the physical record. Third, the defendant's recorded statements were not treated as standalone proof. They were tested against the physical trace map. That triangulation is what juries expect in a serious crime. Independent lines of evidence pointing in the same direction. The defense's best counterarguments, methodology and bias, were important to air and will continue to be litigated where appropriate. Accountability and civil rights are not opposites. The system's health depends on both. For families, verdicts do not end the calendar. Memorials, anniversaries, and the ordinary silence of a room that will not be filled again continue long after a sentence is pronounced. For communities, prevention lessons are pragmatic. Safer routes, shared location when running, situational awareness. Those suggestions are not blame. They are harm reduction practices real neighborhoods ask for after any violent crime. And for practitioners, police, labs, prosecutors, defenders, the lesson is documentation. Jurors trust what they can see, step by step, with dates, times, and signatures. As of today, the official status is unchanged. The conviction and sentence remain in effect, and defense efforts to obtain a new trial continue through the permissible legal channels. If a court one day orders additional hearings, they will be about process, not retelling the geography. Howard Beach, Spring Creek Park, August 2016. Those anchors do not move. One last clarity check to keep this narrative single-tracked and consistent with earlier chapters. We have not redescribed the discovery scene. We have not introduced new locations outside Queens. We have not altered the digital windows or the lab inventory, and we have kept the legal posture precisely where the public record leaves it. Verdict affirmed to date, collateral review pending. That is how you respect both the facts and the audience. Guilty. Sentenced to life without parole. Looking back at Karina Vetrano's story, I can't help but think about how fragile safety can be in the places we feel most at ease. This crime reminds us that justice is not just about punishment, it's about protecting the spaces where ordinary life unfolds. I share this not to instill fear, but to encourage awareness and care for one another. What lessons do you think communities across America should take from this? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this video resonated with you, let me know where you're watching from or why it struck a chord. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel so we can walk through more stories like this together.